Okay, Mr. Phobes here. This is a little mini lesson on the final project portrait of 1000 colors. We're going to be using partitive color, and partitive color are bits and parts of discrete color. They're not blended together. The blending is optical. So when you look at these tiny little parts, they should blend optically. Um, we're going to be using two different color schemes. We're going to use either an equidistant tetrad or a double complement tetrad. You're going to make a choice of whichever one you want to use, and I'll show you how to develop that. We're going to develop this in two steps. We're going to do chromatic value studies in digital media, and then the final portrait is going to be, you can do it in either digital or traditional media, whatever you would like to do, or you could do it in a combination. So, what is partitive color? It's bits of color that are optically mixed. The first experiments in partitive color were by the Impressionists. So this very famous painting by Claude Monet, Impression Sunrise, was sort of the beginning of that idea. The Impressionists were very interested in the way that color was perceived, and how the eye would put together color and optically mix. Seurat, who was really a post-impressionist, developed this method that is probably the most parted of all the different types. It's called pointillism, and he used very small little dots with his paintbrush to create all these tiny little parts of color to optically mix together. If you look carefully, you can see that there are some complementary mixings in here, and what that does is that optically it begins to look kind of neutral. You can see he's got a variety of tints, tones, and shades. I bet you if we analyze this, he probably only has a tetrad that he's working with, and that he's just using tints, tones, and shades of those 4 or 5 hues to get all these different hues for his painting. Van Gogh also painted this way, and you can see that he used the brush to create these different parts. Um, Here he's using this idea of complementary color relationship. The beard is these very warm red oranges. But if you look carefully, he's got a few little complements mixed in there, and that helps, kind of desaturate it optically a little bit. His ground and the jacket are all based on blue, and we know that blue and orange are complementary to one another. So that does two things. The orange is warm and the blue is cool, and that adheres to that idea that warm colors advance and cool colors recede. But by making them complementary, it exaggerates that push and pull even more. There we go. We can see it a little bit better. But look, even in the background, he's got a couple little splashes and dots of the orange, and that kind of neutralizes it a little bit, so it's not quite so saturated. Here's another Van Gogh portrait. Chuck Close is a contemporary painter that uses this to great effect, and what he'll do is he'll go in and he'll lay out an image, and then he'll lay little squares either diagonally or vertically, and then he'll do little multicolored paintings inside, and then when you step back they really become quite representational. He starts them all out with achromatic studies. He doesn't use the computer at all. He does these all by hand. One of the things I'm going to suggest is that kind of a quick and easy way of getting the different layers of values is using something in Photoshop called cutout. It's a filter. Um, and here we have the unfiltered image, and then we have a filter And 6 means there's 6 different values here. So you can see that it's built up, it's very plastic, but only using 6 different values. So here are our tetrad models. So on the left is the equidistant tetrad. There's only 3 equidistant tetrads, but they are made up of a primary, a secondary, and 2 complementary intermediates. And no matter how you rotate it, you're going to get that same relationship. So if we rotate it one hue over, we can see that we've got magenta, which is our primary, green, which is the secondary, and then again we've got 2 complementary intermediates. We've got orange and cyan blue. So there's only 3 of those. Now on the double complement tetrad, we can see how this is created. It's based on the idea of split complements. So the cyan blue and cyan green are the split complements of red. And then if we go to cyan, which is complementary to red, we get the split complement hues of red, magenta, and orange. That sets up these 4 hues. They're based off of 2 complementary split complement color schemes. And we get 4 hues that are pretty complementary to one another. Certainly diagonally they're complementary. But if you notice something, these 2 are relatively analogous, and these 2 are relatively analogous. What's nice when you're creating a portrait is you can sort of play off of this and have certain analogous relationships in your portrait, and then also you can have complementary relationships. I'm going to go back to the equidistant, and again you can see the complementary relationships here. Again, there's only 3. When we mix, we're going to mix. This is what's kind of nice about the double complement. It gives you a few more mixing options. We're not going to mix across, but what we can do is we can mix diagonally this way. So we can mix complements together, but we can also mix these complementary or relatively complementary legs of that. And these will come up with some interesting mixtures too. Because they're not quite complementary, you start getting these kind of interesting mixtures of greens and desaturated blue greens. So you can using this, you can get quite a few different hues. And then, but when we do the equidistant tetrad, we're only going to mix diagonally. We're not going to mix across this way because we'd end up mixing a hue in between, and then we'd have more than 4 hues. So these ones we're only going to mix diagonally. Okay, and then what we'll do is in Illustrator, we'll set up a palette. So this is based on a double complement tetrad, but you're going to do a palette for both a double complement and an equidistant tetrad. And what we do is we set these up using a color guide in Illustrator. There is a tutorial on how to do this. You're basically going to generate 72 hues to begin with, and that will be your beginning point. We're going to do 3 different studies. One of them is going to be a study in using layers. So here I've set up 4 layers of, it starts out with exactly the same photograph, and then what I'm going to do is using the edit and fill command in Photoshop, I'm going to do an overlay and create these monochromatic color schemes in each one of these layers, and it's based on the 4 colors. So again, I've got red, magenta, orange, cyan blue, and cyan green. And if you look at this, you can see the different layers. There's a red magenta layer, an orange layer, cyan blue layer, and a cyan green layer. And so the way these are done is that each layer has been cut out in some areas. So I cut out quite a bit from the red magenta layer and expose the layers underneath. The orange layer it's been cut out in these stripes to review the layer below it, and then the cyan blue layer has been cut out to review the cyan green below that. We're also going to do a study to really understand the value relationships. We'll start out in a grayscale. We've done the monochromatic by basically doing the overlay, but then you're going to come in and you're going to do a study of the same image, one with an equidistant tetrad and one with a double complement tetrad. And here you can see it's exactly the same palette, and then they're just being applied to this. But it's basically creating a cutout pattern and then using the bucket tool to start filling in color. Here are a few examples from the past. This was a student who they used a double complement tetrad of red, magenta, violet, cyan green, and yellow green, and it's a combination of working in Illustrator and Photoshop. Here's another one using the exact same color scheme, and you can see that the color is pretty darn subjective, but they've maintained the correct value relationship to create this sense of plastic space. So if you have a little bit of background, that can be inventive, and then again the hair can be kind of inventive. She's got a multitude of different brushes to create these. This is actually a pattern brush in Illustrator, so she's not going in and drawing that. There's a brush that makes that mark. We'll talk a little bit about that. This one was kind of interesting because what she did is she went and found some apps for the phone and it created some layers from her phone, and then she exported those to Photoshop and started using them in Photoshop. This one shows using an equidistant tetrad of orange, red, magenta, cyan, blue, and green. And you can see he set this up in the background. Look at this. This is just the 4 different hues on kind of a neutral gray ground. This is a cutout filter, and then he's used brush strokes. He's probably created a layer that's cut out that creates this nice crisp edge, and then he's got a layer with some brush strokes. So there's a lot of good things going on in here. This one on the right was created with one filter in Photoshop, and I think it's one of the crystallize filters, and she very painstakingly went through, set up her palette for this color scheme. It's a equidistant tetrad, and then used the bucket tool to dump in all of these, and she really maintained the correct value relationships. As you get further away from this, it begins to look very objective, but we both agreed it really wasn't quite enough, so she came back and she drew tiny little concentric geometries in each one of these either squares or rectangles or triangles. This one is done with multiple layers. He actually created his own sort of low poly layer here. You can see he's got another layer using the looks like the stained glass filter. This was probably a posterized filter. He just got rid of the ground and then brushed this entire background using all the colors in his template, and then he's got another low poly filter here. So there's a lot going on in this, a lot of colors, a lot of parts, and really looking at the problem. This is the last one, and it's a little bit flat for the project, but I kind of really liked her sort of no fear in terms of getting really crazy with the design and really being inventive and trying a lot of stuff out. So that's it.